Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
How many of y'all are in a food coma after lunch? Yeah? Okay, well, hopefully y'all will stay awake for this because it's going to make all of y'all talk and engage. Y'all cool with that?
Okay.
So let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, so hopefully you are here for a Preventionist Snap kit. If not, sorry, you are in the wrong room, but you'll have some fun, I promise. If you want to stay, it'll be good. But we're going to kind of introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about why we chose this topic and the work that we do and everything. But before we do, how many of y'all are preventionists or preventioneers in the room in here?
Yo,
Hey.
go all of us.
Wow.
Awesome.
Hi, community.
We're in good company then.
Yeah.
If you don't do this work, that's not what I meant to not include y'all, but you know, you got your people.
Yeah. So you are in a welcome space, no problem. But we're going to be talking a lot about our prevention work, giving some examples. We want this to be as interactive as possible, as people feel comfortable, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why we want it to be interactive. But we understand not only food coma and other kinds of business, some folks, they're not cool with that. So we want everyone to feel free to make choices in this space and do what they need to do. So just so you know, we're never going to put anyone on the spot or anything. So just feel comfortable and sit in how you need to. So yeah.
Really quickly though, we are being recorded, which is how come you're gonna see us standing like only right here. So it's not that we're standing here to talk down at you from a podium, it's just because we are being recorded to make sure that everyone else can see this presentation as well. If you are not comfortable with being recorded, please let us know right now.
Yeah.
Do we have your permission? Yeah, we're all good? Okay, perfect. That's good to know.
Yeah.
We just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that.
And also with head nods, as we do different activities, we might be asking people if they feel comfortable sharing their perspectives or how they feel or their answers. So thumbs up if it's okay if we reaffirm your answers behind the mic. All right, awesome. And just so you know, we will definitely be asking before we even do that. So after each individual activity to make sure that it's constant and it flows, because consent, right? That's why we're here, so that's important. So yeah.
All right, so my name is Sandal Ali, so Sandal, not Sandal, Sandal. I said a lot because all my kids are like, Miss Sandal, and it's like I've been here for a year and you're still calling me by the wrong name. So I'm huge on that. I am the prevention educator at the Turning Point Rape Crisis Center here in Plano, Texas. So if you don't live in Dallas or in this area, we're about a half or an hour out from Dallas, not too far. So I've been with the Turning Point for over a year. I started in April of last year. It has been a ride. It has been interesting. I like it a lot. I love what I do. Now specifically, we created this I don't even know what to call it, like word art, I guess, that showcases who we are. Now, the reason we've included that is that in this workshop, we're going to ask all of you to be vulnerable. Now, I know the concept of having to be vulnerable, it seems like we're supposed to be weak and things like that. It's become almost a fad. But the reason we're saying that and we're starting off with that is because for the young folks that we work alongside, we do that to them every single day. Every activity that we have, every session that we talk about, if it's stereotypes, power and oppression, right? All of those ideas, they're heavy, they're intense, and they really do take a lot from students and people in general. And so we're going to ask that from all of you. So in that same idea, we're gonna share a piece of ourselves as well. So I am South Asian, if you can't tell. I'm half Indian, half Pakistani. Don't tell me how that happened. That's just how it played out. I know they're not friendly with each other, but it worked out in my family. I come from a family of immigrants from all over South Asia, and I am a first generation college student. So I come from a family who did not attend college here in the US, so I had the privilege of being able to attend college here. I went to DC, so if anyone's from DC, shout out to y'all. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is that I do have a stutter. It's a big part of who I am. So imagine having to talk for a living and have a speech impediment. So y'all will hear it. It's a big part of who I am, so make sure I put that out there for everyone to be aware of.
I'm Madison Jackson. I am the primary prevention coordinator for the Turning Point. I've been there for 3 awesome years, and it is always a ride, especially working with our youth. They are fantastic, but there's a reason why we talked about snap moments, and you'll hear a little bit about it. But I specifically am a bisexual woman. I do this work. I am a survivor as well, so that brings something to the room in and of itself, just like many of us experience that too. So being within the room, understanding our intersectionality, there's many up here that are our individual identities as well as things that we share, even activism and stuff. Prevention work in and of itself could be argued is activism. Sorry about that. We're not going to worry about that. I'm going to turn off the sound. But we basically work very hard to be as transparent as possible. That in and of itself is kind of intense and scary. So since we've kind of shared a little bit about ourselves, if it's okay, we were wondering if y'all felt comfortable, maybe just for like a couple minutes, just with the people around you, introducing yourself, saying where you're from, also for networking across the country. Hello. So maybe just say your name, what area you're from, and then work you do. So we'll just give you a couple minutes just with the folks around you. So feel comfortable. So hopefully you got to know some folks. Hopefully you got to hear about some exciting things that people are doing, which is another reason why we're here, is to make sure that we know we're not alone, because something else about this work is it can be very isolating. And so just to know we have a community in every way and all over the world, all over the place. So just knowing that that's a connection. Now, we're going to do an interactive activity, since there are a lot of folks in here. Just so you know, I'm an extroverted verbal processor, so I feel you. So it's okay, to know we want you to talk and interact and everything, just know that. But this activity is something that a lot of us facilitate, a lot of us have done, but it can bring up a lot of vulnerable things. So before we get into this discussion today and do the activity, we're gonna do a community agreement. How many of y'all recognize this? Right.
We're all like,
You're like, yeah. So we know that we do this a lot in our work, but sometimes when we do it all the time, we understand it can seem maybe desensitized, or maybe it loses its weight of its importance for setting the space and creating a brave space. And what we mean by that is, for community agreement, setting a brave space, if you're familiar with pedagogy of the oppressed and understanding that our work in and of itself, anti-sexual violence work, it is intense, it is a movement, but understand that our work is social justice work, which means it's our responsibility to know that that is not safe. So we don't want to make empty promises and say that we create a safe space, because it's brave, right? We want to hopefully cultivate a space where people feel comfortable being brave as they so choose that works best for them, because we are doing revolutionary work. And so we wanted to set that tone that today and here and as we go forth, we are working together. The folks that you introduce yourself to, these are the people standing beside you. These are the people who we are working with. And so if we can't be vulnerable and here with each other, how can we ask that of our youth, right? So we're gonna do this community agreement just to set that brave space, make sure that we have some guidelines, not rules, to make sure everybody feels included and as brave as possible. So does that sound good? All right, so we're gonna kind of just facilitate this, but just from the top of your mind, take a second to think about, what does brave space mean and what can we do together, holding us accountable, y'all to us, and just everybody together. How can we keep this brave space? What are some things that you think we could add to this as some guidelines? If we're all cool with that, then we'll go ahead and move forward. So thank you so much. That's kind of vulnerable in of itself. So thank you so much for being willing to do the group agreement, because it kind of does set a tone. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an activity together, and we'll kind of explain that. But it's called Where Do You Stand?
So how many of y'all have facilitated or been a part of some version of a privilege walk or activity? Can I get a show of hands? So almost everyone in the room. Okay, so I'm gonna preface this activity by saying that it is a flawed activity, right? It does a very good job of visualizing oppression, but what people forget is that the people who stand in the back, I'm often in the back, you're like a prop, right? To show folks who stand in the front that we're here for you to be able to see the problems that we have always been aware of, if that makes sense. So to be frank with this activity, it will do the same thing, and that was something that we talked about, and it was intentional to reinforce again the specific people that we have in this space, and to ensure that we are aware of that, and that we are inclusive, right? Trying to be in practice in being inclusive, and not just saying that we're inclusive, because we do that a lot, right? So the activity, there is a line down right here in the center of the room. What she's gonna do is she's gonna read aloud statements, and we're going to ask you, if you're comfortable, to either move closer to the line or step further away. You have your own spectrum towards the line. If you don't feel comfortable standing up and you want to stay in your seat, that is fine as well. It's totally up to you. We do understand with this activity, we are asking you to essentially come out and tell us exactly where you stand for certain questions, all right?
Yeah, and so also just knowing that if folks want to, like Sandal said, stay where they're at, and just if they still want to share, that's awesome. Just raise your hand and we will see. You can tell us where you feel like you would be in accordance to your spectrum, right? So that's absolutely fine. So if you would like to stand, you can stay in your rows. If you want to like kind of coordinate and see who in your row wants to stand and do the activity, that's totally fine. But we wanted to make sure there were plenty of options. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to read a statement. Say, for example, something like, stand closer to the line if you love chocolate ice cream, okay? If you're like, yes, that's my favorite, you would obviously be on the line, right? But if you're like, well, I don't really eat it that often, it's not my super favorite, it's okay. You can kind of decide on a scale where you feel like you stand with that. If you're like, no way, that is gross, I don't like it, you stand close to the wall, right? So you get to decide your own spectrum. Please feel free to, if you feel comfortable, be anywhere in the room at this time, however you choose to do that. If you want to stand closer to the row or be at the back, however you want to do that, feel comfortable. So is it okay if we all agree just to kind of set ourselves up before we read the statements where we want to be? So if you would like to stand and participate, go ahead and do so now so everybody knows kind of how we want to do this. So the first one we have is move closer to the line if you have always known your gender identity. Okay, so the next one, move closer to the line if people ask where you're from when you introduce yourself. So next statement, move away from the line if religion has never impacted your day-to-day life. Move closer to the line if you can criticize our government and talk about how much we fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider. Thank you. So if you would like, we're done with the activity. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. Seriously, thank you. Yes, give everybody a round of applause. Thank you.
We know how hard that was. We know it's uncomfortable. I know we're in this kind of work, so we see and hear this all the time, but hearing it from adults in this space, that's something else entirely. Now, the one thing I will say is that I'm going to reiterate that we know this activity is flawed. Like, we're not gonna be 100% about that, but it again does show who the people are in this room, because as she already said earlier, these are the people who are fighting alongside of you in this work. If you are doing true preventioneer work, these are your people, right? We're not all the same. We're not all on the same wavelength, and that's cool. Like, that's all good. But the main point to understand is who here right now is present in this room and what experiences they are trying to bring to the table, and main point, how that will shape their work with young people, right? That is the key behind all this. Not about you, kind of is, but more how you interact specifically with young people. All right?
And to be very frank, thank you so much for your vulnerability and being willing to share things, because we're going to breeze through the rest of this because you already are at the point that we were hoping to be at. But something I will say is the reason why we did it is to help us once again re-engage and refresh the feeling that we ask students to be in every day, where they have to calculate where they stand, what they say, how they say it, because we are hopefully cultivating a space that is brave, but also because it is revolutionary work, that we are asking them to be in this space all the time. Maybe not with this specific activity, but with every single time we bring up anti-oppression work. And so specifically, that's why we did that, just to refresh that feeling and build the empathy with our youth to help us understand where they stand too. So
let's talk about this. Intersectionality, that is a buzzword. It's become a word that is thrown around all the time. I studied health in college. It is my pet peeve when concepts and ideologies are just like handed out all the time, and people don't really understand what this concept, and it's an ideology, right? What this ideology truly means. So, as a group, how should we define what intersectionality means? Because we know, we've all heard it, right? We know we're talking about the identities and the experiences that all of us have. We know that as an overarching idea, all right? And we know that it's been coined by whom? Kimberly Crenshaw. Let's give credit where credit is due, right? So in talking about that, how do we as a group, for this specific space in here, how should we define what intersectionality means to us? Are we good with this? Anything else you want to add to this? No? Okay.
Matrix centering and intersections of identities. So once again, we wanted to rephrase it because it is something that is used a lot, and it is a tool, but any tool that is used to help can be used to harm. So we want to make sure that it doesn't become watered down or forgotten its purpose. And obviously giving credit to people like Kimberly Crenshaw, who have been doing this work since the 70s and have laid down the groundwork to make our work better today, even from different theories and backgrounds and studies and stuff like that. It does make our work better. So understanding that, just as Audre Lorde said, the reason why this is important for us and for our work is because there is no issue that is in silo. It does not stand alone. There are no single level issues, right? So recognizing that when we do anti-sexual violence work, it has to be anti-oppression. Because if we are doing things inside that room with our youth that are justifying and building a foundation for all the other systems that are impacting them and creating sexual violence in the first place, why are we there? It is our responsibility as facilitators to make sure that our intersections are acknowledged within us, so when we walk in that room, we know the space we take. And to make sure that we cultivate and make a space to where they can fill the box in on themselves, right? Not us giving it to them or telling them, oh, I come from anti-sexual violence, I know you need this, or this is what we need, or this is what you should do. No. They understand the systems they live and work within, just as we understand ours, how we were able to place ourselves, so acknowledging that they know. They don't need us to tell them that. So just being able to use that as a tool to recognize it. And that brings us to our first tool. So on your worksheet that you have a couple spaces. There is a toolbox, and there's also a note section and a little stick figure that's gonna apply to you in a second. So this is one of our first tools that we'll be talking about. Please, we want you to feel free to fill in as much or as little as you want. So just however you feel, but our first tools are intersectional hard hat. So why do you think we chose hard hat? What do you think that means?
We're under construction.
We're under construction, all right?
Okay,
We're under construction.
Need protection.
You need protection from
Protection.
what? Everything. Okay. Falling objects. Okay.
Falling objects.
Yeah.
Like maybe those snap moments,
Mm-hmm.
right?
To protect you and to help you be prepared, right? When shit happens, you're like, oh, and make sure that I can properly and effectively respond to what students are saying, or to make sure they're being heard as well. All right.
Yeah. So we're going to practice our intersectional hard hat. You already did a lot of that inside this activity, so we'll only give you about a minute just to kind of reflect for a second if you want to include some of the things you did on this activity, but turn to your stick figure. And we want you to kind of acknowledge some of the most primary intersections that you bring into a room as a facilitator. What are the identities that make you bring space in a certain way with your youth? And what are the intersections that you think impact you as a facilitator and the youth in the room that you are working with? So kind of just take a second and remember, we all know the basic identities, race, ethnicity, gender, religion. This can be anything. We've had youth who are like, well, I'm sassy. And we've had youth who are like, well, technically I'm employed, right? They have a part-time job. So this is however you feel comfortable filling it out. So you can take a second just to kind of place and bring back into that zone. So as you fill that out, just kind of think about, how does this impact you as a facilitator, right? We know how it impacts us personally, but as a facilitator, whenever we think about how this impacts the way we walk into a room, how we are received when we walk into a room, and how we are impacting the topics and how to bring up the topics, how do you think this can be used as a tool? How do you think this can be used as our hard hat? Thank you for asking that clarifying question. So I'm specifically asking, is this supposed to be used to protect us in this moment? Basically, what we're asking, to kind of just clarify, how can this be used as a tool to make sure that we can be the best we are? And specifically, we're trying to think of the concepts of the triggers and privileges we have inside our intersections to consider why we need a hard hat. Because if we are experiencing those things, what's happening to us in that room, right? As we're recognizing our privileges in that room and then recognizing our triggers, right? So I'll just give an example to maybe help clarify. I'm a survivor, like I mentioned, right? Doing this work, walking into classrooms every day, talking about sexual violence, sometimes can be very triggering, right? So what hard hats do I need to put on as I walk in that room? How do I need to check in with myself to make sure that whenever that comes up for me, how am I gonna deal with a no-snap moment? The moment, to be honest, a student makes a rape joke, or whenever something like that happens, right? What am I gonna do? And there's different ones that we have, right? But also recognizing, okay, as we're walking into that room, it's okay for us to be human. It's not about us to put on this hard hat so that we are perfect and that we're always gonna be on top and that we're always gonna be like in the game. That's not how it works. But just so we can check in with ourselves to make sure that we're facilitating to our best abilities. And there's another dynamic to it.
Yeah. Anyone?
Well, and thank you so much for sharing the personal things. And to be honest, we had some discussion questions, but y'all are already way there.
Yeah.
So thank you to y'all. Hey.
So
But y'all seriously are there. And just thinking about, once again, with a hard hat, it's not that, once again, just even whenever we do this work, it's never about how can you protect yourself, right? It's not necessarily about that. That's not what we're trying to say. All we're trying to say is considering our triggers and our privileges as we walk into a room so that we can be prepared for a no-snap moment whenever maybe, someone in the youth group says something, but also maybe when we say something or do something, we're like, hold on, I need to check myself. What self-care do I need to do so that as much as possible, recognizing my own human status, that I can be as present as possible all the time, right? And there are gonna be days straight up where that doesn't work. And I will tell you, a part of a hard hat that I practice is I have gone in with my youth groups and been, hey, I had a really long day. I'm here because you deserve this space. If I don't talk, know that it's literally just because I had a hard day. If anyone else had a hard day, we can change the game. We can think about something else or talk about something else or just play a game today. But I had a hard day, so if you feel like I'm not giving enough, don't be afraid to ask me something. Don't be afraid to let me know. Hold me accountable too. So a part of that hard hat is being prepared for those moments and being willing to have the vulnerability enough to know that vulnerability is a part of our hard hat. It's not about doing, this like hard, intense work all the time. It's self-awareness, self-care, and recognizing that so we can do the best we can, and also being able to recognize it with our youth.
So for the Crossroads, the point of this entire thing that I'm gonna wrap up very quickly. This is a slide that we struggle with, if I'm being real with all of you. It was something that was really hard to articulate, to be frank. And the point of this slide is really, okay, so what? We've talked about all of us, the identities that we have, and all that stuff that's really important, right? But specifically, how does this apply when we are facilitating with young people? Why does it matter? Right? And the 2 or 3 points that I thought of as we were all talking and all of you were sharing was, one is that we do not want to step into a space and kind of like hold court, almost as if I got a training on intersectionality, so I know exactly what you're feeling right now, and don't worry, I got you. That's literally not how that works, right? And not only that, if you talk to high schoolers, you do that, I dare you to do that in a high school. No, oh my gosh. They don't think we're cool. They don't, no matter how much you do this work, they do not think you're cool, right? So it's a lot about how you hold space, right? And how you make sure that you acknowledge, I am 23. I was in high school a while back. I'm not that old, but they think you're ancient at this point, right? And so it's really important to realize that for young people, it's not about I get you. It's about I hear you, right? It's really understanding that, you know, your experiences are your own to process and to share. And that sharing piece is point 2. There are certain topics and certain issues that we have no right to bring up. So here's an example. We were doing a summer a program at the Poison Girls Club in Collin County in Texas. And the students there are primarily students of color. And we had students who were all high schoolers, and they're all boys. And it was primarily students of color. Again, we had a few students in there who were white. And we were speaking specifically on that day about power and oppression. And so power and oppression is a topic that always gets people really riled up. I love talking about it because I am all about riling people up. But there are a lot of folks who are like, oh, I really don't want to talk about it. So we were talking about it, and we had a student who was black, and he is present. Sorry, it's such habit. He's black, and he was talking at that time period. The biggest issue that was happening to him and his family and his community was a law enforcement of violence towards his people. It's been around for a long time, and his view was that, you know, it's been happening for decades. Only now people are paying attention to it because it's gone viral, right? And we had a student in there who was white who was like, I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm not okay being in here. And like my first thought, I was like, whew, I'm not going to say anything because if I do, I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. So I didn't say anything. I took a step back, and we didn't say anything, right? I am a person of color. I'm South Asian. I'm not black. So my experience with law enforcement is totally different. It's not the same, but I hear what they're saying. But her experience is not the same either because she's white. So we were silent in that moment, and they handled it. He kind of called in as soon as was like, hold on, you're uncomfortable? And they talked it out, and his response was, well, I feel like when we talk about law enforcement violence, it has become a very sensationalized. And that comes from a place of privilege, right? We all know that. And his response, a student of color, his response was, I don't understand how you can think that. And the idea for this student who was white, he was saying, well, you know, there are a lot of black folks who shoot up white cops. And that is something that if y'all have ever been to Collin County where we work, that is a very common ideology a lot of folks feel like is true. Again, you are a product of your environment. And for youth, they have a lot of, they have access to the internet. And that can be positive, and that can be a really big challenge. And so, again, we didn't say, I don't think I said anything in that moment. We didn't say anything. And that was something, had I not been aware of this, I would have been like, okay, we're done talking about it. We're not talking about politics. We're not talking about race or any of that. But that specific interaction taught us that youth don't need us. We were only there to make sure that they didn't start fighting. That was the only reason we were there in the first place, you know? But they hashed it out. Now, I don't want to say they came to an agreement because I still talk to those youth and we got a lot of work to do, you know? But the thing is that it reaffirmed to me that I don't have to be in there. And not only that, is that you lend your voice when it is required and when it's called upon, right? It is not on you to start speaking about topics that, one, you did not bring up, or two, that they frankly don't want you to be part of. Because from their perspective, I had students say that it is easier when you're just there in the background and you allow us to talk. Because in school, we get silenced a lot of the time. Where we hear things like, well, I don't talk about politics and religion in my classroom. For a lot of youth, it's not politics and religion, it's their day of, it's how they live every day. And for me, like as a person of color, I can't not talk about it. You know, especially with Trump in office, every single part of his agenda and his platform attacked who I was as a person. You know, and so for youth, we're asking all of them to be silent and quiet who they are. That's not fair, right?
Yeah. So specifically recognizing that intersectionality and gaining that knowledge is a privilege of ours to understand that, but as I've learned from Sandal, the tool for help is the tool to harm. So we don't get to use this knowledge to all of a sudden single story our students and assume I get what you're going through, even if we have similarities. Understanding that it is our responsibility to be prepared for anything and everything, and even for that moment, it was during the time whenever, unfortunately, I'm sure people were aware of the shooting that happened at the peaceful protest here in Dallas. And so the moment that happened, we were like, all right, we are not the ones to bring it up, but we are prepared. We have to know what's going on. We have to be ready so that space needs to be held when it's necessary and when it's brought up by them. We're not going to assume. We can understand the histories of our community and understand that, but that's it. That's as far as we take it, to make sure we cultivate space and that we don't require space. So just recognizing that and knowing our own triggers and privileges to make sure that the way it's brought up and things like that is being honored, and why sometimes you need to take a seat, even as facilitators. So that's why that one was so hard, is because we never wanted someone to feel like the tool was so you can walk in and be like, oh, you've shared this vulnerability, even if we're not single storying them, I know your whole struggle. I get you. Like, I got it. You know, like, I know the story about you. Oh, you shared this one thing, now I get your whole story. That's not the point. It's about being prepared, always. So to kind of add to the toolkit, and we've shared some of these, one, storytelling, right? Being able to really share and connect, that is important.
So in talking about storytelling, how I see it is you have to be human with youth. I know where I work, we're big on boundaries. I like boundaries. They tend to get tested a lot and pushed and ignored and things like that, but they're good as like a general concept, you know? But with youth, I feel like for boundaries, it's rules. That's basically exactly how we're playing it. It's a rule. And what I find is that the more human you are, the more like you bring your true self to them, the more effective you are as a facilitator, right? Because we're not talking to youth, we're trying to work alongside of them. Because as we've heard as a theme in this entire conference, for the people who are in charge or should be in charge are who? Youth. They're not unfortunately present. I wish they were here, right, to hear all this and to contribute and to be here speaking to all of you. But it's important to realize that the work that we do is for them, alongside them. So it's important that we bring who we are to the table, because we ask the same thing of them every single day. So if you have students who are asking you, like, Miss, are you married? Like, how many cats do you have? Well, like, I get kids who ask that. And the first time I was like, that's none of your business. I'm not telling you that. But as soon as you open up, it's kind of like, well, like, this happened to me at home, and you build a relationship with them. That's the goal. And if we're talking about primary prevention work, you hopefully will follow all your youth year after year after year, right? That is the goal. If we're talking about true and effective health work, it should be as if you had not been there, your program could still flourish without you present, right? That is the work that we're talking about. So if you pull out of a group or a community, they should still be able to have the same exact ideas and conversations as if you were present, right? And the only way we do that is by being able to build sincere relationships with the people that we are working alongside, including our young people.
So cultivating a space where they have a voice, to know that you don't need us, right? You don't need us, right? Your voice matters. So allowing them to storytell, and as they request that of us, offering it as we feel comfortable. Once again, it's all about consent, even with us. But understanding that sometimes those things will come up, and the reason they get personal is because we're asking them to be personal, right? So that's a part of your hard hat too. Be prepared to know that, all right, kind of just decide your boundaries as well. So the next thing is picking up what they're putting down for those oh snap moments, right? Do not ignore it. Positive or maybe late bloomer seed, right? So when we think about that, pick it up, do not ignore it. And the reason why it's important to acknowledge that is in the being prepared for how your facilitation plays out and how it does or doesn't bring that space. So if someone is, saying something awesome, affirm it, right? Yes, thank you for bringing that up, right? Thank you so much. Yes, the way you said that is awesome, right? And not to condescend, but just to be like, your voice is awesome, everyone's is awesome, bring it, right? But whenever we have those late bloomer seeds that are maybe struggling, pick up what's putting down, right? So one example I can give is being a bisexual woman. There are times whenever we talk about the push up, push down, and we talk about heterosexual versus LGBTQIA+, right? And there are some challenging conversations, right? Understandably so. Not only our community and our state and things like that, but just in general, everywhere that can be challenging. There was one time in the group where we were talking about the push up, push down, and we mentioned that. And one of the youth was like, well, hey, hold on a second. Like, I don't understand, but that's wrong. And we were like, what? He was like, being in that category is wrong. And for a second, like, I had had a long day, and I had been transparent with them, but I kind of could feel it coming up in myself. I was like, oh no, oh snap, oh snap, oh snap, right? And so I was like kind of preparing for it. I was like, well, maybe we can kind of like think about it. And before I finished, he was like, because it's a sin. It's wrong. It's not okay. I can't accept that. And the moment he said that, I pulled my adult card. I did. Instead of using my hard hat, I pulled my adult card, and I was like, nope, we're not talking about that. Nope, that's not how we talk in here. We're done. And I abused it. I did. I had to acknowledge that. But then the moment I did, another one of the youth was like, hold on, no. Let's talk about that. What do you mean by accept? And I was like, beep, 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 back up, okay, all right. And then all of a sudden, from asking that one question, this whole conversation blossomed, and maybe a seed that we didn't expect to come through proved us wrong. So I didn't even need to use that card, but my trigger almost shut that down. I almost squashed both of those voices, right? Both of them, and I almost lost 2 opportunities to help somebody grow. So understanding that you gotta pick it up. You know, if we ignore it, whichever seed is coming up, it will stay there, right?
To that slide, how many of y'all are in schools where you can't say certain phrases or words? Consent, a sexual, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we're in good company. So that specific slide is for those time periods too. I remember I was in an 8th grade class where kids started talking about prostitution and stripping, and I was like, because trafficking is like, I've talked about it so frequently, and I'm not allowed to talk about that to my funding, to my agency, or to the school I was working in. And so it's important to navigate carefully around that to make sure that you acknowledge them and that you hear them. Even if you have to say, I hear you and I appreciate that you're saying that. But unfortunately, and I've said this, because of the rules in this school, I cannot talk about that topic. Done. Because that makes me seem like an asshole. Like, I'm not gonna lie, he was kind of like, okay. But and I pulled him aside afterwards. I was like, I want to talk about that with you, but I cannot do that, not in the school environment. And so again, you still heard that student, right? He was still heard. He wasn't ignored. You weren't like, this is not relatable at all, So we're almost out of time.
Yeah,
Sorry.
almost done. So specifically, the reason why we say that is because we do navigate the system. So being prepared before you walk in, the potential snaps, or kind of just using that as a learning moment. How can I do this better next time? Or what can I do to set up the space to where, all right, if I can't talk about it, how is it still gonna be heard, right? Either between the youth or maybe pulling aside. Think of your methods and your tools that you will use. So these are some of the focus words that we've used. If you wanna add them to your kit at all, awesome. But the last thing that we wanna talk about is how to use it, right? So number 1, know it. Know it. It's not someone's job or even youth's job to teach you about what they deal with, right? Just like any group. It's not someone else's job to teach you about their own oppression. So understanding, being an adult in the room, you have access to all this information. Know it. Gain it. So just being aware of that.
Yeah. So for practicing it, we're talking about all of these ideas as fluid and constantly changing. If you are not learning and practicing and stumbling, you're doing it wrong. I'm putting it out there, all right? You will stumble. That means you're doing it correctly. And if your young people hold you accountable, awesome, right? That means you've cultivated an environment that allows them to feel safe in holding you accountable, all right? And that is a huge point to really understand, that practicing means that you will not be 100% all the time, and that is okay. You're being real, you're being human to them.
Yeah. And it should always be flexible, right? It should always be updated. So the last thing is grow it. Right? Be willing to grow it. However a seed presents, they are seeds. So knowing that it's just like the saying we hear, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. Whether it's a late bloomer seed or the one that we're like, yes, you're awesome, you're in here, right? Like, you're already ready to go. Whichever seed, do not ignore them. They are all worth it. And just how we believe in this field, understanding that all seeds matter, and they are repeating things that are in their environment, doing the things that they've been conditioned with, just like the risk factors that they've been growing up with, right? The weeds are the risk factors, so we need to water it with water, right? We want to be the one who helps them grow on their own, so that when we move out, it's okay, and that they can grow on their own. They can be happy. So I'm sorry, we breezed through. Y'all are awesome. If there's any questions, we will definitely be here. Thank you for your time.
Y'all were an awesome
You
group.
were awesome.
These activities went over really well, so thank all of you.
Fill out your evaluations.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.